After reading the book, The God of Small Things, I began to think about the title. When I heard the word God in the title, I thought we would be reading about some majestic, godlike, grand figure. But when I found out that Velutha was really the God of small things, I was a little disappointed because I thought that he didn't really live up to the name of that was described him in the title. However, I do think that the title was accurate when it used the word small things. Throughout the novel, a lot of small events lead up to big tragic ones, and there are a lot of small requests that Velutha grants from multiple different characters. One of these examples is Sophie Mole's death. It was a product of multiple small events, and it led to a very tragic ending. And I think that that's only one example of smaller bad incidents leading to bigger bad incidents. Therefore, I think that the small things is fitting in the title, but God is not.
Throughout Roy's The God of Small Things, symbolism is an extremely prevalent factor, and one symbol is Papachi's moth. The entire second chapter is named Papachi's moth and is dedicated to the moth itself, and this is where the reader finds the literal meaning of Papachi's moth, which is a moth that Papachi discovered while he was an entomologist, and the moth fell in his drink, and he thought it looked abnormal, and his life's greatest setback eventually was not having the moth that he had discovered named after him. That's a quote from page 48. And Papachi submitted the results to a taxonomist, and essentially they told him it was not a new type of moth, but later the moth was discovered to be a new species of moth after Papachi had retired, which was extremely unfortunate because he could not have the moth named after him, and Roy tells us that Papachi's moth was held responsible for his black moods and sudden bouts of temper. Its pernicious ghost, gray, furry, with unusually dense dorsal tufts, haunted every house that he ever lived in. It tormented him, his children, and his children's children. So we can see that the moth is representative of failure and the Ipe family's failure, as well as negativity. And the reader first encounters the moth when the moth lands on Rael's heart after she insults Amu, and Amu says that the insult made her love Rael less. And the quote from that on chapter 4 is, "A cold moth with unusually dense dorsal tufts landed lightly on Rael's heart, where its icy legs touched her. She got goosebumps, 6 goosebumps on her careless heart, a little less her Amu loved her." So again, showing the negativity and failure that the moth symbolizes. And even at the very climax of the novel, after Sophie Mole dies and Rael and Essa feel responsible for her death, the moth appears again, and Roy says, "On Rael's heart, Papachi's moth snapped open its somber wings out in and lifted its legs up and down." That's a quote from chapter 16. And the moth essentially stays with Rael because she is a member of the Ipe family, and every time there is failure or negativity, the moth tends to be there and is representative of that negativity.
There are many different aspects to the motif of family in The God of Small Things, but I chose to talk about the nature of the Ipe family as a whole. Arundhati Roy said herself that every detail she included in The God of Small Things was purposeful and deliberate, and the family name is no exception. Ipe is the name of a type of wood that is common in tropical climates, also known as Brazilian walnut or lapacho. It's known for its extreme density and is very difficult to work with. It is particularly challenging to glue pieces of the wood together because it is relatively oily. This quality also applies to the Ipe family because the members of the family have a difficult time expressing their love for one another and connecting. The members of the family, especially Baby Kochima and Mamachi, often act out of obligation to protect the family's name and honor, but rarely do they act out of love or concern for the welfare of the other members of the family. The family appears to be a well-connected unit, but underneath the surface lies relationships that are deteriorated by generations of abuse and loss.
In her novel, The God of Small Things, one is quickly made aware of the unique writing style that Arundhati Roy uses to develop plot. That is, she does not use the traditional chronological writing style found in most novels, but rather a discontinuous, nonlinear style that switches back and forth from past events to present ones. It can be easy at first to question this writing style, especially towards the beginning, as it is not only unconventional but can be confusing at times to distinguish events as the plot is just beginning to develop. But she does this for various reasons. One being to provide a more sharp and direct contrast between events that occur in a character's life, as well as connect similar topics. Additionally, Roy not only manipulates time and the manner in which the novel is written, but also time within the characters themselves. Time in this novel can be considered to be frozen, where it appears that every moment that a character experiences is preserved until the moment that they die. For example, in the very first chapter, we encounter a passage that reads, "Perhaps it's true that things can change in a day, that a few dozen hours can affect the outcome of whole lifetimes, and that when they do, those few dozen hours, like the salvaged remains of a burned house, little events, ordinary things, smashed and reconstituted, imbued with new meaning, suddenly they become the bleached bones of a story." Time in this novel seems to not be taken lightly, and is very purposeful and precious, which can be seen in this quote that even the smallest amount of time can change, quote, "the outcome of whole lifetimes," end quote. Due to the importance of time in this novel, time in this story is preserved and therefore unchanging. This is done so in order to ensure that these memories made during these periods are not forgotten, as these memories ultimately help shape who the characters are in present day, adding depth to not only the characters themselves but the story as a whole. In conclusion, with time being the center and driving force of the novel, the entire story revolves around past events, which allows for the unconventional, nonlinear method of writing that Roy employs. She attempts to preserve time through the characters in order to allow for a greater understanding for both the characters and the novel as a whole.